Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to LGC Pulse. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cynthia Loren. I'm the founder and lead strategist at LGC Africa. We are an Africa-focused business which works alongside professional service organizations, particularly law firms, who are focused on improving their marketing and business development efforts. LGC Pulse is a free marketing insight session during which we invite guests and ask them to share their knowledge and insights on what it takes to grow and maintain a successful Africa professional services business. Our hot topic for April is pricing. And this afternoon's session is slightly different for those of you who've attended in the past. I won't be interviewing our hot seat guest. Rather, what I've asked him to do is give us a short presentation on the topic, which is entitled Having Better Pricing Client Conversations. And after that, we will open up the session for questions and comments. So let me introduce this afternoon's guest. Stuart Dodds is co-founder and principal of Positive Pricing. He is one of the first and longest serving pricing and legal project management directors in the global legal industry, having initially worked at Linklaters and then subsequently at Baker McKenzie. Stuart sits on a number of industry-related advisory boards. He is a fellow of the College of Law Practice Management, and he's also one of the founders and board members of Legal Value Network. Stuart is, as well as everything else, he's the author of the first book covering law firm pricing, negotiation and LPM, a book I'd highly advise that people take a look at called Smarter Pricing, Smarter Profit. So basically, in Stuart, in summary, we have with us this afternoon not only an expert, but a thought leader on the topic in hand, someone who's literally living and breathing best practice on an area that is so central to what we do. So Stuart, a very warm welcome to you today. Really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy diary to speak to my LGC Pulse audience. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and let me just make sure we've got everything up and running. So can everybody see the title slide? Cynthia, can you see the title slide okay?
Yeah.
Having Better Pricing Conversations. Cynthia and I caught up at a session that I did a few months ago, actually, called The Future of Pricing. And some of the content that you see today is from that session. But we also were very keen to make sure that, given the time that you're spending with us today, that there was a number of key takeaways that you could do within your firms as of leaving this webinar or the seminar. Over the last three and a half years, I've been working in Positive Pricing. It's a very small global consultancy with 2 people, and we primarily provide pricing support to law firms. So we're particularly doing it from the law firm side, but we also work with other professional services. And what I want to share with you today is literally how we can have those better pricing conversations. So some of the things that we've seen both from our line experiences and also our consulting experiences that will hopefully help you do that. So what I'd like to cover over the next 45 minutes is the following. Firstly, recognizing the impact of what successful pricing looks like and what that opportunity may present for you within your firms. Secondly, I'd like to, as probably the key part of the session, give you some hints and tips about how you can begin to have those better pricing conversations with your clients, or indeed encouraging your partners, if you're working in a more of a BD marketing function, for them to have those pricing conversations in a better way with the firm's clients. I also just want to give you some context about what we're seeing firms beginning to focus on next. So once they've got that bit sorted, what do they focus on as the next stage? And hopefully we've got some time for some Q&A at the end as well, if there are questions that come through either in the chat function or directly. So let's just kick off with the very first part. What's the impact of successful pricing? And some of you may know this already from work you've done or articles that you've read in the past, but a lot of firms, certainly in times of economic distress, focus on a number of key things to think about. Well, what do we do to improve our profitability? They often look at what happens if we sell more work. What happens if we sell more work at lower prices? What happens if we reduce our fixed costs? What happens if we change our variable costs? And yet the thing that has the biggest impact on profitability, regardless of which industry you're in, and more so within professional services and legal, is changing the price. So using as a very simple example, if we have revenue per partner ranging from, say, 100,000, in this case, dollars, but you choose your currency, up to $500,000, an impact of a 5% change in price is quite significant. So that $5,000 or that $25,000, depending what scale you're on, goes directly to your bottom line. You don't have to work any differently. You don't have to work any harder. You don't have to win new clients. You're just increasing your price a little bit to make sure that you're increasing your profitability. And how can you do that? How can you get that 5%? Well, there's a number of things you can use to try and help drive that. One is you can give higher rates. So instead of the rate being 100, it's now 105. It could be that you're reducing the level of discounts that you give. And one of the top tips, and indeed this is something that a number of you maybe have already heard from other people, don't negotiate in fives. We like things to be 5% discounts, 10% discounts, 15% discounts, 20% discounts. If we can reduce that discount, instead of giving 10%, we give 8% or we give 7%. That's where we're beginning to get some of that money back into the firm. A big focus for many law firms, particularly a number of the big US firms and UK firms, has been to reduce the write-offs that we get on some certain types of matters. So if you think of an M&A matter or similar, sometimes that can be 10, 15% of the value of the matter itself. So a lot of people are focusing on that project management, that delivery part of the process. Or it could be setting your client's expectations slightly differently. It could be around saying, this is going to cost $20,000 rather than $21,000. It could be, again, just changing that frame of reference. So there's a number of things that we can do. And luckily, we don't need to do 5% in each of them. We can just do little bits in each of those things because they all add up to a bigger number. And I want to give you, as the next slide, something that actually is a very good way of getting certainly those who are maybe a bit more skeptical about changing their pricing behaviors, the impetus to do it, the burning platform to do it. It's the only formula that I'm going to use in the session today. So D times N times I, P times W. It's not very catchy, I confess. But it really is there to demonstrate that even small changes make a very, very big difference, particularly in the law firm world, because of the level of margin that we typically recover for the work that we do. So D are the number of pricing decision makers within a firm. These are typically the partners, but there may be some of you on the call. It may be others within your firms, but typically it's the partners. And let's say, for sake of round numbers, that we have 10 partners or 10 people who can make those pricing decisions. N is the number of pricing related decisions each of those make per week. And this is in the case of a conscious pricing decision, a very deliberate pricing decision. And our pricing decision could be what price we charge. Is it $100? Is it $105? It could be what fee approach do we use? Do we do hourly rates or do we do it on a fixed fee or a cap fee? It could be, do I put Cynthia on the matter or do I put Stuart on the matter? Because we maybe have different experiences, we may have different costs. But those are the types of things that actually are a pricing related conversation. It could also be, when do we have that conversation with a client about the work that's now going out of scope, or how do we negotiate with the client? Remember what I said about not negotiating in fives. So let's say that there's one of those that we do per week. What's the incremental profit each of those conscious decisions makes? And let's just say it's $250 for sake of argument here. And finally, how many times do we do it? W. And we say we do that 52 weeks of the year. Now, those of you who are much better at maths than I am will work out that that's a very big number very, very quickly. So think about the number of partners or people you have in your firm having pricing conversations, and think about the impact that even the small changes in behavior can make to the overall profitability. In this situation, every person who's making that decision would contribute $13,000 to the firm. Now, it's going to be slightly different depending on your firm and your practice area, the number of partners you have, but it's a very good guide to highlight this is why it's worth providing attention on this specific issue. Now, for most law firms, there's a 1-to-3 ratio. This is, again, a useful number to bear in mind. There's a 1-to-3 ratio between, if I improve my realization by 1%, in other words, I give the client 1% less discount, I'm typically going to be adding about 3% onto my existing profitability. Now, for most law firms, and again, I appreciate it will vary depending on your jurisdiction and the type of law that you do, it's likely to be about a 35% profit margin for most law firms. If your profit margin is 20%, it's a 1-to-5 ratio. So for every 1% you increase in terms of realization, you're adding 5% onto your existing profitability. And if you're at the other end of the scale, you've got a 50% profitability, it's a 1-to-2 ratio. But on average, it's 1-to-3. And it's a useful thing to remember because it helps add as a break when we're having those client conversations. So again, coming back to this point about not negotiating in fives, rather than going 5%, then 10% when we get some client pushback, by going from that 5 to that 10%, we've just lost 15% of potential profitability, which means we've got to find it from another client or for somewhere else. So again, it's a break on how far we're prepared to discount, and we'll come back to some of that theme as we go through as well. So again, a useful thing to remember. But what do we mean by pricing? A lot of us, particularly those who are in BD type roles, particularly find pricing is very event driven. It's when the client RFP comes in for that big relationship that you want to have, or it could be for that very big specific matter. And one of the dangers of pricing is seeing that it's event driven. It brings everything to a very sharp focus. For us, pricing is actually much more of a process. And ultimately, it's the process of determining what we should be getting, what we should be receiving in exchange for the services that we provide for our client. So notice that pricing is not the price that we get at the beginning, the price that we quote to the client. It's actually about making sure that we get close to that at the end. It's what we receive. It's what we put into our bank. It's what pays our salaries, pays our investments, generates the profit. And there are a number of things to consider as part of that. A lot of these things where professional service staff can have a big role to play. One is actually thinking through what the inputs are. So what are we actually trying to do by winning this piece of work or by winning this client relationship? Are we wanting to get visibility within a jurisdiction, within a market? Are we trying to keep our team busy? Are we trying to consolidate the work we do with a client across a range of different practice areas? It's also understanding what our costs are, who was typically going to be supporting that client, what investments are we making in that client. It's around understanding who the competition may be, who is that client already working with, and what do we need to be aware of about how they have provided their services and what they do, and potentially what their prices are, if we can get visibility of that. And also when it comes back to certainly specific matters, but also broadly at the relationship, what's the client trying to get from this? Why do they want to be working with an outside counsel firm? What are they trying to get in terms of their value by working with our firm or another firm? So those are the inputs that we typically see. And this is where, again, a lot of us have a big role to play. There are also a number of ways that we present that price to a client. We present that price by using different fee levels. So that's the absolute number. The fee level is 100, it's 200, it's 50, it's 75. But also around the fee structures that we use. So it could be around, do we use things on a fixed fee basis? Do we agree to do some risk sharing with that client? Do we do things with the client on an hourly basis? Do we do things over a monthly retainer where they pay us a sum of money for the delivery of a range of services during that calendar month? There's a whole range of things, again, that we think about how we present to the client. And then there's the stuff in the middle. There's the bits that hold the glue together. It's a bit of who's involved in that pricing conversation. What's the right approach for different client sectors or different types of work that we do with clients? So what's the strategy, the pricing approach that we take? What tools or templates or processes are in place to make this conversation or make this pricing piece easier? And how do we make sure we're going in the right direction? So what are the things that we do to make that better? And indeed, I'm going to share something with you that some of you may have seen before. It's from the UK, but actually having had conversations with a range of firms globally, it's actually pretty pertinent for everybody. So I felt it was okay to share in this context. A lot of firms are beginning to acknowledge a pricing gap, and they're beginning to do things to try and address that gap. This comes from the PricewaterhouseCoopers Law Firm Survey 2019, and they've done something similar in 2018. I did check, they didn't do anything in 2020, or else I would have updated the slide. But what we're really looking at here is the solid red line and the solid orange line, for those of you who can see that. And I'm going to start at the top of the clock, at 12 o'clock. Clients, we say here, understanding how our clients buy our services is really, really important. What's of most importance to them? And we're going to ask you a question about this later on in the session today. But understanding our clients, their buying behaviors, their preferences, how important is that, and how good are we doing that? You see there's a little bit of a gap between the orange and the red line there. Governance is another area that a lot of people are beginning to focus on as well, particularly if you think about what's happened over the last 12, 13 months. How do we make sure we're being consistent with how we deal with our clients? So if we are the clients that we should be investing in more heavily, maybe giving a bit more discount to, and who are the clients that we don't? How do we put those structures in place, and how do we make sure we're doing the right thing as a firm? Metrics, again, you can see a bit of a gap there. Metrics is around, what should we be using to help work out, is this pricing approach the right approach for this client? What examples have we got within the firm? What examples have we done before? What's worked well? What don't we want to replicate? What do we want to replicate? Options, again, this is very much around communication about different fee structures to clients. And you see here, there's there's a smaller gap here. But one of the key things to highlight here is, although many firms feel comfortable talking to clients about different fee structures, what many firms don't do is they don't proactively offer different fee structures to those firms. It's always the client who feels we're having to ask our law firms, can we do it a different way? Can we do this on a fixed fee? Rather than the law firm proposing to do things very differently. And actually, those firms that do that typically get much stronger client relationships. So again, proposing different ways of doing something is really, really key. Support, that varies by firm, but that's the level of pricing support that's available for those conversations. And the big one here is also around confidence. And this is very much around confidence around communicating the price to a client. Many partners, many of us in law firms are very comfortable coming up with what we think is the right price, but they may not feel comfortable communicating that price to the client. So what are the other leading firms doing? I just want to share with you some context before we go into how we have those better conversations. The first thing is actually they're beginning to focus much more on not the price of the services that they're giving to the client, but the value that they're delivering to the client. So there's a much greater focus about how they articulate that value, how they quantify that value, and how they sell on value to the client. If we sell on value, we're not going to be selling on price. That's the first thing to recognize. The second thing for some firms, and I know there's a number of big firms in the region, they're beginning to build much more operational level engagement with the clients, not just lawyer to lawyer, but maybe business development team to accounts processing team or client relationship team. So again, there's more points of integration or stickiness with the client, and that gives us better insights. It lets us understand the client better. It helps us deliver much higher quality work for that client and much more pertinent work for that client. It's also around beginning to use better information when we're putting together proposals. So what's worked, what hasn't worked, what do we want to do, what language do we want to use? We're seeing some firms beginning to invest a little bit more in technology and AI, particularly around pricing and legal project management. This is more around not broader financial systems, but specifically in this area. And the final thing that we are seeing people doing is actually focusing on equipping the partners, the senior associates, and also often the senior professional staff with stronger pricing skills. Unlike many industries and professional services and legal particularly, that the sales force are the partners by and large. So once that partner leaves your office, once they have that phone call with the client, we don't have control anymore. They can say whatever they like because they're an owner of the firm. They're trying to do the right thing for the firm, but we can't necessarily ensure that they're saying the right things, they're doing the right things. So a lot of firms are beginning to focus on making sure that their partners, their senior associates and their professional staff know what the good looks like and knows what the bad or less good looks like. So they are trying to make sure they're doing the right thing. And finally, a lot of this comes back to, we think what's been happening over the last 12 to 13 months. There was a lot of debate about how firms were reacting in that context. So this is, obviously a much longer term view, the information that's in front of you. But for the here and now, there was also a number of key themes that came through. One is actually, what did good pandemic pricing look like? And this doesn't just work in a pandemic. This works with every client relationship that we have. And the first thing is actually firstly recognizing that there's a continuum. We can either be very compliant to a client request. So when a client says, you're too expensive, you need to lower your price, we would immediately lower our price. The danger of doing that is that it changes the nature of the relationship. We're now becoming a provider rather than a partner to that client. And it also creates a sense of frustration with the client. I asked Stuart to give me another 5% discount. He said, yes, maybe I should have asked for 10%. Maybe I should have asked for a free secondee. Maybe I should have asked for something else. Next time I'm going to ask for something else. And we can get into a very vicious loop around pricing around there. But the reason that we say yes is because it's easy. The other thing, and this is actually, hopefully we didn't see too much of this during the last 12, 13 months, is that we're dismissive, we're unhelpful. Where our client says, look, I'm in a little bit of distress, can you give me an additional discount? We say, no, we don't give discounts for this type of stuff. We're not engaging in the relationship, we're not valuing the relationship, we're being aloof. And again, that's easy to do, it's not preferable, but it's easy to do. But the one that's harder, and needless to say, the one that is recommended, is engaging regularly with your client. It's where we work out, well, if they are struggling, how are they struggling? If they are having budget constraints, how can we work within the constraints of that budget to find something that's mutually acceptable, both to the client and to us? It's about engaging and showing care and empathy with the client, and also recognizing the challenges that places within our firm. Those types of things, although it's pandemic related, apply to any of our client relationships. We shouldn't just be saying yes because it's easy to say yes. We shouldn't be saying no because it's easy to say no. The thing that adds the value, the thing that strengthens that client relationship and gets us to better pricing outcomes is engaging with the client, identifying and exploring some of those opportunities. So that's as context. I want to move a little bit on to how we can have those better pricing conversations. And before I do so, I'm actually going to ask for an example. AJ, I know you're on the call, and I know you've got a great example or a couple of great examples to share. How do you have effective client conversations around pricing?
Thanks, Stuart. I think one of the things you said that just resonated with me was, you said the confidence in communicating pricing, right? So I think the first thing is if a client gets a sense that you're not sure of your price or how you arrived at your price, and you threw a number out there, then that conversation is already heading south. So I think that's the most important thing, that you can justify that pricing. And there's something I always try to do, because the bottom line is you're selling intangibles to people who are used to buying tangibles. So sometimes you just have to let them see how tangible this is, by letting them know all the people who will be working on this, the steps, the processes, and just build a picture in their minds as to, how busy you will be working on this for 3 months, 6 months, whatever. It just helps, for them to see, what exactly you are bringing to the table. And the last thing I would say, Stuart, is sometimes it's good to just have comparators. So sometimes I just say to a client, well, that's the cost of a business class ticket. I mean, pre-COVID, people used to fly into London. Some people fly into London 3 times a week, go for a meeting, come back, So when you say to someone, look, that's the cost of a business class ticket, it puts it in context, and they wonder, okay, I'll buy a business class ticket just like that. So this isn't so expensive. I'll stop there, Stuart.
AJ, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing those examples. And I agree, just so there was no collusion, but I agree with what AJ was saying there. One of the key things actually that reminded me of is when you're communicating the price, do it, as AJ was saying, confidently, but also remember then to have a little pause. Don't try and fill the gap. We like to fill the gap. And when we fill the gap, particularly when it comes to law firm pricing, we say, we can do it for 100. Well, maybe we can do it for 95, and we start self-negotiating. So, take AJ's advice board, do it confidently, but then keep quiet for a little bit. But what are we also saying as a way of having better pricing conversations, just building on what AJ was saying? I'm going to ask you a question. Some of you may feel comfortable doing this in the chat. Some of you may be comfortable saying this out loud. But I'm going to ask you the question, what do you think are the characteristics of the right price? I don't mean the price level. I don't mean it's at 100, 200, 300. And I want you to think about what the characteristics are from your firm's perspective. And I want you also to think about what the characteristics are from your client's perspective. And I'll give you an example to get the ball rolling. For example, from the firm's perspective, we may want to make sure that any work that we do is appropriately profitable. And the reason I use the word appropriately there is that some work, say tax work, is going to be more profitable than maybe employment contract work, for example. It's going to vary by the practice area because of the markets that we operate in. So maybe in the chat function, what do you think would be the characteristics of the right price from the client's perspective? It's always easier to do it from the client perspective. We get to be a client for a little while. There's no such thing as a wrong answer. I was always told that by my parents. And then what I'll do is I'll share with you what we've done. We've done this exercise for about 3,000 partners. So we've got a pretty robust set of information that we've seen how this works. But what do you think the characteristics are? If you feel less comfortable doing it for a client, maybe do it for your firm instead. Just give you 30 seconds or so to get some things up there. Oh, the chat's disabled. Okay. That is a very good point. Thank you very much, Carol, for pointing that out. In the interest of time, now that you've had a chance to think about it, what I will do, I'll just share the answers with you to see, what we typically see. That might be a bit easier. So The first thing is, from the client's perspective, they choose you. They understand that this seems to be an okay price to pay for the work that they're doing, they're asking you to do. They, well, maybe not willingly pay, but they certainly pay. They don't argue when they're paying the bill. They understand that bill was for services rendered and for value delivered. But the key thing really here is that they believe that they obtain value for money. It's their consideration, it's their assessment of value that's important here. And hopefully they're loyal, they're willing to refer. We sometimes hear other people saying that they want to have transparency on the price. They have to make sure it's a price that's appropriate, that they can get budget for. But ultimately it comes down to those types of things. From the firm's perspective, there's a number of things. Firstly, it's appropriately profitable, but it also meets with your objectives. Remember, we had that as one of the key pricing inputs earlier on. We need to understand, what are we trying to do by winning this piece of work, or by winning this relationship? Are we trying to broaden that relationship out? Are we trying to get presence in a practice area that we haven't done much work in before? Are we trying to get expertise within a certain sector or with a certain client that we can then reuse elsewhere? Are we trying to break into a new jurisdiction? So it's understanding what that is. And that may mean that we do invest, that we do give a bigger discount than we'd normally do, but we know why we're doing it. We're making a very logical and deliberate choice about why we're doing that. But we should also be capturing a fair share of value. And what that means in a pricing context is that we are not only improving our financial performance, so the work that we do today is more profitable than the work that we did yesterday, and tomorrow is more profitable than today, but it also means that we're strengthening the client relationship. It's not all about money, it's around relationships and performance. And the final thing is that we certainly see it's around how we ration our time. We don't like to work for $1,000 a day or maybe $1,000 an hour. We might not want to do that for $10 an hour. So again, where we are being busy or we're constrained, it allows us to allocate our resources much more appropriately. It allows us to make that assessment. But the word that we don't often hear, and this is one of the things I'd like you to take away, is we don't hear this word very often. It's got to be fair to the client, but it's also got to be fair to the firm. We often feel that when we have a pricing conversation with a client of our firm, that it's very one-sided, that we have to give the client more and more and more to win that work. Having that change in mindset, having it fair to the client and fair to the firm, is really, really important, because that means that we say, well, actually, this is actually how far we can go. We know what our limits are. We know what our parameters are. And therefore, it feels a much better, a much more open pricing conversation to have. And there are three implications of that. The first implication is we shouldn't be surprised when the client says, actually, your price is too high. What can you do? Because they have to get a price that's right for them, that they feel is fair to them. They have their stakeholders, they have their budgets. But importantly here, just because the client says your price is too high does not mean that your price is wrong. You're the experts at what you do. They're not necessarily the experts. So we recognize where the client's coming from, but we shouldn't start to self-doubt. We shouldn't start to self-negotiate, thinking, well, actually, do you know what? Stuart was 10 hours in the matter. Maybe she's only going to be 5 hours. And AJ, he was 10 hours. Maybe he only has to be 8 hours. And we start chipping away. We start trying to change our price because the client says our price is wrong. We need to understand that. The second thing is our role to get a price that's fair for us. You know, we're not charities. You know, we maybe do a lot of good work, but we're not charities. And we want to do that in a way that helps strengthen the relationship and strengthens the trust, not damages it. And I want to give you an example here from one that I was told many, many years ago by a partner that I was working with. And this was a client that she was dealing with in Hong Kong. So I appreciate it's a different jurisdiction, but it could be anywhere. And there was this piece of work that they were doing, and it was, say, $50,000 US dollars. And she had a meeting with the client. As I say, it was a long-standing client. And the client said, thanks very much. You know, we've got quotes in from other comparable firms, and they think they can do it for about $35,000. And the partner said immediately, yeah, we'll do it for $35,000 too. And then she left the client's office, went back to hers, and then got a phone call from the client a few days later saying, I just want to give you a call to let you know that I haven't given you this piece of work. And I haven't given you this piece of work for two reasons. The first reason is that you came in at $50,000, and the minute that I said that somebody else was doing it at $35,000, you immediately said yes. Now, to me as a client, particularly one that we have a relationship with, that does not feel to me that you gave me your best price to begin with. It feels like there was a lot of, fat or excess in the in your number there. So that actually, firstly, didn't sit well with me. But the other thing that doesn't sit well with me is if you negotiate like that with me, somebody that you know and we've had a long relationship with, how are you going to negotiate on my behalf? Now, The partner reduced her price from 50,000 to 35,000 because she wanted to do the right thing for the client. But in this situation, what she did inadvertently was she damaged the trust and she damaged the relationship. What she could have done is she could have said, thank you for that information. Let me go away and see what we can do, and then come back with something else after that. It's the fact she responded immediately. And again, those types of things are useful to help coach your partners or others in your firm so that they don't immediately react to that desire to please, because it may backfire. And the third implication, this comes back a little bit to what AJ was saying a few moments ago, is it's also our role to influence the client's perception that our price is fair. AJ talked about the context. He talked about the business class ticket as an illustration there. And that's exactly what it's important to do. If we give a client a fee for a piece of work and we don't give any context around it, what do you think that client does? That client immediately looks somewhere else to think, well, how does that compare to firm A or firm B or firm C or firm D? They start looking for that context. They start looking for that comparison, and they may not be the right comparisons to make. So the things that clients typically look at is what helps them make or assess that context, what helps them realize that it is the price of a business class ticket. There's a lot of things on the slide that you see. I'm sure, hopefully you recognize many of them. What people do, certainly when I'm doing this session more generally with law firms, when I'm asking about the pricing challenges that the firms face, is, well, we're not being compared to the right firms. So comparing us to not our direct competitors, but other firms and their lower costs, and therefore that pushes our price down. It could be what we've charged them before. A number of clients have had issues where, or my clients, where they've had rates in place with their clients for 5-6 years, and they're trying to change that. And the client says, well, hang on, it used to cost 100 yesterday. Why are you now charging me 180? I don't understand what happened between yesterday and today. It could be the discount that they get off your standard rate. So some clients still revolve around, I get 20% off all my outside counsel. Well, guess what? If that's how you know the client reacts, increase your rates by 20% for that client and then take 20% off again. You get your standard rate. There's a number of ways, or sometimes it's a case of just getting a big discount from that original quote, from the 50,000 to the 35,000. But the two key things, and again, this is something I'd like to highlight for you to take away, the two best things to focus on are the benefit to the client, and this comes back a lot to what AJ was saying a few moments ago, and also options that we create. The benefit to the client in terms of this is what it will allow you to do. This is why we are best positioned to help you do this. It's back to the expertise that we have. It's back to our understanding of your organization. And if we can quantify what that looks like, whether it's in time, whether it's mitigating risk, whether it's in improving revenue, whether it's around protecting or enhancing reputation or managing costs, that's a good thing, because it shifts the focus away from your fee as being a cost to something that they can use to maximize the value that they want to accomplish within that piece of work within that organization. The other one is around options. This very much changes the conversation from, should I use your firm, to how do I best use your firm? Each of those things begin to diminish the role of the competition. It begins to make the assessment not relative to other providers, but absolute about what you will give to that client. It's an analogy that I like to use is it's like going to the supermarket and you want to buy rice, or you want to buy pasta or something, or beans, or whatever it may be. You see the different brands in front of you. They want to keep you in the shop. They don't want you to go somewhere else and see if they got a different type of bean or a different type of pasta or a different bit of rice. So what we're trying to do as part of when we set that frame of reference is about how we influence the client's perception that our price is fair, is we give them the context to assess that by. And typically when we do our broader programs with clients, we go into this in a lot more detail. But I wanted to give you certainly those little bits of insight, and hopefully it resonates with you and it's something you can feel how you can apply. When we're talking about benefit, it's also important to recognize that the benefits go across a range of different things. It's what's the benefit we provide to the organization, to the big corporate entity, whoever that may be. It could be a bank, it could be a consumer products company, but it could be individuals. But also, what are the benefit we give to those individuals that we work with on a day-to-day basis? How do we help them look good? How do we make their lives better? And finally, it's around how do we offer something that our competition doesn't do as well as us? How do we differentiate ourselves from the conversation as well? So some things, again, to think through, but those two areas in particular allow us to control the comparison, allows us to control which business class ticket we show them, and it allows us to change the conversation from should I use your firm to how do I best use your firm? Because if we only give one number, we're giving the client an ultimatum: choose us or don't choose us. If we give options, we're saying there are different ways to use us. What works best for you? And then we continue the conversation. And then we get to the better answer, and we give the client much more value because it's much more targeted. So a lot of firms are beginning to focus on this, but what are the firms that are at that point? What are they trying to do to look ahead a little bit? And sort of coming to the end before we open it up to questions. A number of firms, one of the things that we did in our firm is we interviewed about 100 pricing professionals within leading professional service firms and law firms. We had some representation from Africa, primarily in South Africa rather than more broadly, so apologies for it being a bit more narrow. But we had folks in the UK, US, Australia, Canada, mainland Europe, and we asked them what are they focusing on, and there were 9 key things that they were really focusing on, which we've sort of called the 9 pricing pillars. You can see them here: the rate setting, all the way through to governance. The ones that are most important and the ones that firms are beginning to focus on more, in addition to some of the things that we've talked about before, is how they price their key clients. Where are the clients who should get the investment? Who are the clients that don't get the investment? And we also need to recognize that certain products and services that we give those clients, the main clients of the firm, have different values as well. Some works very, very high value. Some works more commoditized. It's more flow work. So actually, do we price those things slightly differently? And what does that look like? Value-based pricing, again, thinking through, not everything is worth $100. Some things are worth $200. Some things are worth $50. Some things we might want to do on a fixed fee basis. Some things we may want to do on a risk-sharing basis if we're allowed to do that. So again, firms are beginning to assess what's important there. A lot of them are beginning to try and put in place retainer agreements where they agree for a range of services to do it for a fixed fee each month. That gives the client certainty, transparency, but it also gives you visibility and allows you to improve your processes. We saw a lot of that happening over the last 12 months. Partner development, for the reasons that we talked about before, we want to make sure that people know what good behavior looks like. We want to know that when they leave the building, when they have the phone call, they say the right things, they do the right things, they're considering the right things. And the final key thing that people have been focusing on is very much around governance. So actually, let's just make sure we're being consistent and fair to how we treat our clients and how we are dealing with that within the firm, and are recognizing who gets the investment, what those levels of discount should be, and how we manage that. And again, a lot of firms focused on that, particularly over the last 6 to 12 months with the pandemic impact as well. But given that, what I'd like to just do is then sort of, Cynthia, we can move to a very quick survey before I get to my final slide and then wrap up. So I think, do I need to stop my screen? Is that right?
I think I can launch it.
Okay, perfect.
So, okay. I've launched. Hopefully you can see that. Hopefully people can see that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So just think through, for a major matter that your firm has won or that you've maybe been involved in recently, what was the main reason the client chose you and your firm or your firm? Expertise, relationship, or price? We'll give you about 30 seconds just to put what you did there. Thank you to all those that have voted, and yeah, that's good. So I'll just wait till it gets to 45 to give you all a chance to vote. Yeah. Now, there's something that's very interesting about that. Well, maybe not interesting. You probably already knew the answer, but nobody has said price. Nobody has said price at all there. A lot is around relationship. A lot is about expertise. And I think that's something that we need to remember. Although we perceive clients buying our services on price, they really don't. They want that expertise. They want to know, and it will vary slightly by matter, so I do understand that. But primarily, they want to know, I've got the expert. I want the certainty of outcome, particularly if it's a high-value matter, if it's a big M&A matter, a litigation matter, or something that's really, really critical to that organization. But a lot of the time, and in that case, price isn't really an issue, as long as you can demonstrate that you will get them the right outcome. For relationship, a lot of it is around relationship. It's about your knowledge of the client, your understanding of the individuals and the organization. It's about how you tailor your responses. It's about how you work. It's about the insights that you bring, based on you're working with similar clients within the region and maybe more broadly. And in that situation, the relationship, as long as your price is comparable to others that they would be considering, that's okay. So if the range of firms that I'm using as a client maybe range from 80 to 100, as long as your price is somewhere within the 80 to the 100, if I have that really strong relationship, it doesn't matter which end of that spectrum I'm at, because I'm still within the range of the firms that I'd consider. What we often do in that situation is that, well, we know who the other firms are that are pitching. And if the range is between 80 and 100, we better go in at 90. Actually, you know what? Just to be really, really sure, let's go in at 85. We begin to self-negotiate. If we really have a strong relationship with the client, they're not really buying on price as long as that price is in the ballpark, within the range of the other firms that they consider, because the benefits that they get from using you are much greater. And interestingly, nobody chose price. That's really, really encouraging. So thank you for taking some time to do that. And certainly, that sort of mirrors our studies as well. So it's around recognizing and responding to client needs. And actually, the client want and needs, when we've done this information, we've asked others and we've collated other surveys together. Low price is 5th out of 5. They don't really want a low price. What they want is certainty of price, and you can do that through, using fixed fee or providing some sharing of risk. They want to minimize the risk of a successful outcome or the commercial risk to them. They want to make sure they're not wasting money, and they want to make sure that the work that you're doing is aligned to the value of the work you're being asked to do. I was speaking to a client of mine yesterday, and they were sharing an example of where one of their outside counsel firms, this was a law department, had been using a firm who had spent $50,000 to get an award in litigation of $750,000. Sorry, of $750. So that $50,000 to $750. That is not being aligned to value. So the client wants to make sure that if I'm doing work that's relatively straightforward, I want a price that reflects that. But if I'm doing work that is relatively complex, I'm happy to pay a price that's more aligned to that value than not. And that dictates how we should be responding. We should be having, where a price is aligned to value, a strong business case. If we can do that with the client, that's great. We may not be able to. We may need to use our own context, our own business class tickets, to quote AJ's example, to help give them that context to say why that price is fair. But a lot of clients really just want to see that we're not wasting their money. They want to see cost consciousness. It's how we staff. It's who we put on the matter. It's how regularly we give them the updates, whether that be through a weekly meeting or a phone call. It's around, we're not wasting your money. We're using it wisely. And we're only doing things that are out of scope when they're absolutely necessary to give you the outcome. And we will inform you about that in advance. To minimize risk, certainly commercial risk, some firms are using contingency fees. They're putting fees at risk based on their performance or the outcome of the matter. Price certainty, obviously, things that fit around there are around fixed fees or retainer fees. And actually, where they're buying on price, we need to influence their perception of what's a fair price. If they are buying on price, that's fine. We'll give them 3 options, mid-price, slightly lower price, low price. But if they're buying on price, we should be delivering to them on price. We should make sure that we're not giving them a business class service for an economy class ticket. They don't get the bells and whistles. They don't get the same level. And I'd probably question whether those are the right types of clients for those of you on the call for your firms. So I just really want to give you a broad view. I'm conscious we're coming to about the 45 minutes, but I do want to open it up to some questions because I think, Cynthia, I think we've got a little bit of time left, haven't we, today to chat about maybe some of the things that you're saying. So we talked about the impact of successful pricing. We talked a little bit about having those better pricing conversations. Hopefully there were a number of hints and tips that you can take away and share with your partners or even put in place yourself. And I just want to give you a little bit of context of what other firms are beginning to look about as the next stage to help you think through your pricing journey. And with that, Cynthia, I'll hand back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Stuart. That's been incredibly valuable. I've actually got a couple of questions myself, but I want to just open it up to those in our audience. If you do have a question or a comment or something that you'd like to share, if you could pop that into the Q&A box, and that way we can read out the questions so that other people can benefit. So if you could do that as soon as you can, that would be super. Whilst people are just thinking about what they want to ask. Stuart, my question is, I know you've mentioned about sort of competitors and, that being one of the areas. So I guess my question is, how important is an awareness of your competitor pricing? And do you have any thoughts on methods that one can employ for figuring out what others are doing in the market?
Yeah, I'm going to answer it two ways if I can, Cynthia. I think the first thing is your contemporary pricing theory looks at not just what our costs are, and that's actually typically how a lot of law firms cost. What's our cost? What's the margin? Therefore, what's the price? It's Stuart at 10 hours at $100, therefore it's X. That's a very internal view. So if nothing else, it's good to look externally. What's the market price? What are other people charging, or what do we know other people are charging? Now, the disadvantage of that is that they might not be giving you the same thing. They may be giving you an apple versus a melon. You want to make sure it's the same type of melon or it's the same type of apple if there's a comparison that's being done there. So having an awareness is okay because it helps frame how you want to think about the pricing. But the third component, and this is true for everything, it's true for phones or cars or holidays or whatever, is what's the value? So contemporary pricing theory brings together what are our costs, what are we seeing in the market, but also what's this worth? What's the value of this worth? And one of the ways to address that competitive context, certainly when you're having a conversation with a client, remember I said that if you give one number, you're giving the client an ultimatum, use this or not. If you also give one number, it's always going to be wrong. It's either going to be too high or too low. If you give the client options, it also allows you to say, if it is a competitive process, well, are they giving you the same things? And if they aren't giving you the same, can we have a conversation how we can more align what you want to what they're offering and what we can be offering for you? It allows you to continue the conversation. So that's part one of the answer. The second part of the answer is, well, where do you find this information from? Now, a lot of it is actually, one thing that you can't do for antitrust reasons is get a rate schedule of a law firm and put it in your pocket or keep it in your firm. There's certain ethical guidelines around that, but we pick it up from conversations with our clients. We pick it up from having laterals join our firm from other firms. What do you typically charge for a partner doing X or doing Y, or an associate doing X or doing Y? We hear it from the clients, from the proposal feedback process. How far away are we? Even if we win it, what made you choose us? How did our price compare to others? There are a number of ways of doing that. One of the biggest challenges in anything to do with competitive feedback is taking one single instance as a pattern. So taking the information out of context, because we don't know what that other firms' objectives were. It may be we're going to price it really, really low because we're not really busy or we want to break into this client. That's not the market price. That's their price for that specific transaction. The other challenge is actually how do we collate that information within our firm? Because we're picking up in conversations, we're picking up in from client chats. One really simple way of doing it is by having, as part of a partner meeting or as part of a practice group meeting, 10 minutes on the agenda saying, let's just talk about things we've seen from a pricing perspective over the last week or last 2 weeks. It makes people think about what have they heard. It allows them to share the intelligence or the context that they've heard, and it means sure that everybody's on the same page. And that's probably the easiest, most effective way to share that context. And then when we're making our proposal, we think, what's the cost, what's the market doing, but what's the value, and then present options to the client.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. And I think one thing particularly to pick up on is the point that you've actually said conversations with the client, and not just positive conversations, i.e. when you've won a bid, but actually also when you've lost one, figuring out how far away you've been from the original price. So that's really helpful. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions come through, so let me just read them out for you. First one says payment risk is a key issue. Should we price in a premium for a client who you may think may delay payments inordinately, and if so, how?
I think that's a great question. Thanks, AJ, for the question. This is something that a lot of firms were doing over the last 6 to 12 months when they were trying to assess what's the risk of our clients defaulting on payment. And I think, payment risk, certainly in some sectors, some whether, depending on the sector or in jurisdictions, can be an issue. We should always be making sure it meets with our objectives. So in this situation, where we know that there is a potential payment risk, firstly, I would be giving a slightly higher fee to that client. I'd be having slightly tighter payment terms with that client. I'd be regularly engaging with that client. But I think the fundamental question is whether that's the right client for the firm. It becomes a much more strategic question. If we know that there are payment risk, what value do we get by working with them? And does that counter the risk that's in place there? But a lot of firms were saying, we're not giving those clients that are payment risk preferential rates. We're saying it's our standard rates. It may even be a slight premium rate. We're making much tighter payment terms. We're having much more regular conversations. So we're making them accountable at each stage. We're probably invoicing more frequently to make sure that things are going through the system. And we also have a backup plan if things don't go to plan. So hopefully that answered at least some of that context.
Great stuff. Next question. Would you involve the marketing department to get the value package together?
I would say yes. I'm very biased. When I was in my pricing roles at Bakers and Linklaters, I was part of the global marketing leadership team in each firm. And I actually think that one of the things that many firms sometimes get wrong is they think that pricing is purely a finance function. It's about the numbers. It's not. It's about the value proposition. And if you think about successful proposals that you've either written or you've seen, it's very clear from the very first page, this is how we will help you be successful to the client. It's very clearly stating the value that you will bring, how you're helping manage their risks, addressing their key issues, and then you talk about the price. I think it is critical that marketing teams get involved in shaping that value proposition. It's going to differ by client. It's going to differ by sector. And I think the skills of marketing teams, certainly those that I've been involved in, I'm sure many of those of you on the call, I think have a great role to play. And after all, it is one of the 4 Ps of marketing pricing, isn't it? We sometimes forget that. But yeah, earlier engagement. One of the key challenges, I think, with any pricing conversation, and I know this from when I was a consultant, it was the last page you filled in on the proposal. It should be one of the first things you think about, because you want to make sure that your pricing or your commercial proposition flows through your document around how you're cost conscious, how you've got that expertise, how you've got that relationship, how you've got different approaches that they can engage with you on. That's why marketing's got a key role to play. Fully supportive of that.
Yeah. And I would actually just add, also based on my own experience from working in international law firms where I've had the opportunity to work really closely with pricing teams, I think it's so important for the education of those in the marketing team to also understand pricing as a concept, and to really have some enthusiasm for that in terms of just the bigger offer. So absolutely agree with you.
I'm just going to build on that just a little bit, because actually I was saying to Cynthia at the beginning, I was doing a session this morning, and I'm doing another one after this session today to 2 different clients. And actually, both of those sessions are targeted to their BD and marketing teams. And the reason it's targeted to those teams is to help them become coaches and advisors to those within the business. So they understand what good pricing looks like, and they can be the champions of that good behavior within the wider business. So, a lot of firms are beginning to think about that now too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, conscious of time, so one more question before we let you go, Stuart. Would you advise that firms adopt the systematic pricing method, adopt pricing systems and templates? In your experience, does this help achieve profitability over turnover?
That's a great question, Shagrudi. Thank you very much. I think there are certain things that it makes sense to put templates in place for. And the reason it makes sense to do that is it gets greater consistency within your firm. It's easier to pull them together. So, if I think about simple litigation or, an employment contract, it allows you to make sure you're using the right rates, you're using the right profile of the team, because you know what good looks like, what's been successful, it's 10 hours of Cynthia, it's 2 hours of Stuart, or whatever it may be. And I think for a lot of things, that is a very good basis. You should never use that as the final answer, though, because it's back to what I said a little bit before. When you use a template, what you're doing is you're developing, what are the inputs? What are the costs? It's Stuart, Cynthia, 10 hours, 2 hours, whatever it may be. There's that secondary stage, which is actually, that's what this would say for our standard rate, for our discounted rate, but what should the price be? That's when you bring in, what's the market doing? What's the value of the transaction? And then you build from that. But it's a great way to help partners, particularly, develop a pricing proposal. But we need to go that next step, which is, what's the market doing? What's the value? And how can we refine that initial price into something else? And that's actually a really good way of working out what your options should be. One way could be actually doing it through a template to say, this is what the price is. So that's my middle price. That's my middle option. It could be, well, what would we do if the client was price insensitive? So it didn't matter how much they paid, but we added more value. That's a more expensive option. What would we add to do that, to make it more expensive? And the opposite of that would be, if the client is price sensitive and risk averse, what would we take away to give a lower price? And guess what? That's now you've got your 3 options. So there's a way you can use those templates well, but a lot of it is around consistency, making it easier for people to do the right things, visibility of this is what good looks like, and then you have that further conversation.
Brilliant. Stuart, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed just listening to you, and I've learned something again today. One more question for you, actually. I was just going to ask, if people are interested in sort of getting a bit more help from you for their firms, how do they go about that? I can see you've put up the slide, but if you could just shout out what the best way is to reach you, email, LinkedIn, etc., that would be super, just so that people know how to follow up.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And you're very happy. If you want a copy of the slides, again, just email me. So the best way is email me at stuart.dodds@positivepricing.com, or to send me a LinkedIn message. And I look forward to continuing the conversation for those of you that want to.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to everybody this afternoon for joining us for another session of LGC Pulse. We hope you found it really valuable. Please do subscribe to LGC TV. We're Loren Gold on YouTube. We have a wealth of free resources for all Africa professional services organizations, and we have much more planned in the year ahead. So please do make sure you're signed up and following us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, whatever your preferred social media is. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to end the meeting there. Stuart, thanks once again.
Thank you. And thank you to AJ as well. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.